In this video, I'm going to tell you about why I think that Games Workshop is taking a lot of cues from the video game industry. A lot of people have been asking me about this recent news from Games Workshop, which I'll get to in a sec. But I just want to let you know that this is not exactly an opinion piece, but there will certainly be some opinion. It's me. This is mainly designed to help explain what's going on to newer players and hobbyists, which has, well, at least for the last about 7 years, the first couple of years I was on the channel, I didn't really know where I was going necessarily, but for about the last 7 years, that's been the mission of this channel, to get new players and hobbyists into the hobby, and so I want to explain this. So the news that I was referencing is recently Games Workshop announced new seasons for Warhammer 40,000. There's going to be a bunch of new stuff and books and all that kind of stuff. And when I first heard about it, I was like, I feel as if that there's a word that they missed when they started talking about seasons for 40k. And that word is pass, as in season pass, which is a thing that we see in video games all the time. Now, admittedly, I understand there are plenty of Games Workshop-based video games. They're all licensed to other companies and this and that, but they're all, but that's not what I'm talking about here. This is more about their core products, the physical stuff, the miniatures, and specifically the books. So I'm going to quickly explain a season pass in video games and what that means. But first, I'm going to talk about a video game that I've been playing for a long time called Sea of Thieves, which is made by Rare and published by Microsoft. And it's a cartoon pirate kind of game, and it's a lot of you're sailing the seas with your friends and fighting skeletons and digging up treasure and stuff like that. And it came out in like 2018, and it launched, and it was very shallow. It was very pretty. There was just the water alone and the sunsets and stuff like that, and just the graphics, and it was very, very cool. And it was neat, but there wasn't much to it. About as shallow as a mud puddle. But they've kept adding things to it for free over and over and over, as time went on. And then in 2020, as they were making another big addition, they're like, hey, we're going to do this season pass thing. And what this was you paid $10 and then you got access to nothing really that nobody else doesn't get access to. Nothing that you get fancier hats, you get more cosmetics. All of these updates and things like that in many season passes are, hey, you get a cooler looking sword. It doesn't do any more damage than a regular base sword, but it looks cooler. You can get a cool sword by just playing the normal, stuff, but you get an even better one if you get the season pass. Now, I'm not against season passes in that fashion. Like I said, I bought that game for like $60 when it came out sometime in 2018, and then they've never really required me to spend any more money. When that first season pass came out in 2020, I paid $10 because I'm like, hey, I've been playing this game on and off for years. I owe them a little bit extra money, I feel. I appreciate what they're doing, and I got a fancy hat, great, or whatever, and stuff like that. But they've done several since then, too, that I've played here and there, but I haven't really seen a big, giant reason for me to go and do the season pass. If I started playing a lot more again, I probably would, but I'm not being left out of anything because I'm not doing the season pass. That's kind of different. Now, these days, big companies are producing the game and then launching it with the season pass at the same time. So like, hey, you could buy the game, but if you really want all the data and the information and all the stuff, well, then you got to pay extra as well to get the season pass. And then we'll do another one of those and another one of those. The reason for this is because the big corporations that run the video game industry these days have no chill. So it's constantly. We launched the game, I know, but you got to pay us more if you want all of the game. And that's kind of a big thing right now in video games. Luckily for us, I guess, 40k is a little bit more like Sea of Thieves in that you can still play the game. This stuff's not required, at least not for everybody. Now, if you're just playing with your friends and having a good time with them, you don't need to buy any of this stuff, frankly. There are still people playing second edition 40k, probably first edition Rogue Trader as well, and we're on 9th now. So, you don't have to update. That's one of the big benefits to tabletop games over video games. Video games very frequently either auto-update or they don't let you into the servers if you're not at the same, level of updatedness. But you don't have to if you don't want to. You can just keep playing the way that you've always wanted to. Or another thing that people will do sometimes in this situation, if you're just playing with your friends, and this is what a lot of the role-playing folks do, is that one person buys the book and then everybody kind of shares. I could see that being something too. If there's somebody in your friend group that's like, I really want to try out this narrative, this or whatever, fine, let them buy the book, and then you guys can all look at it and go, okay, cool, and reap the benefits. So if you're really champing at the bit, though, for all that new lore and narrative content and all that kind of stuff, because either you're just into the lore stuff, you don't even really play, or yeah, you play once in a while, but really it's about the story, or you love the narrative stuff. You play a lot, again, with a friend group, but you love getting new stuff and new ideas and new narrative campaigns and all that jazz. Then there's a little bit of a benefit to this thing in that you now know that it's going to be changing every 6 months, and you can kind of schedule and budget for that stuff if you're looking forward to getting it. So it's kind of nice for those folks as well, but then what if you're a competitive player? If you are a competitive player, there is a good chance that there's going to be some content, some of the Warzone books and things like that you're going to basically need if you want to stay updated in the rules, in the tourney like meta, whether it's tourneys at your local store or whether it's the big tournaments like Adepticon and Las Vegas Open and Nova and stuff like that. Those things are going to be things that you're going to need those rules if you want to be able to play competitively like that. And sure, there's Battle Scribe and stuff like that. You can do some of that and try to at least get like points costs and things like that, because point costs are going to be important in these new books as well if you're trying to, again, play match play and competitively. But, the people who play competitively at this point, probably, especially if you play a lot, you're probably used to having to buy a lot of books and dig through a lot of paper very frequently. So this, at the very least, is kind of putting the cards on the table, as it were, and saying, look, there'll be a bunch to drop in and then in 6 more months. And so you can, I guess, plan for that. The biggest problem, I think, with all of this, however, is going to be for the beginners. Like I mentioned, the people who are trying to get into Warhammer 40,000, they're not going to know whether they need this stuff or not. More books just frankly kind of adds to the confusion. When you initially start out, like when I first started in 5th edition, you pretty much needed the big thick book, although sometimes they started making those little small ones, or you needed, and you needed the codex. Those are the two things you needed, and there you go, bam, you're ready to play. Now, there's so many books out there, people don't know what you need to get playing. And frankly, at this point, I don't even know what to tell people who are interested in getting into 40K. I get a lot of people on the channel who are like, hey, I'm interested in getting into 40K. What do I need to get into to do? And I'm like, well, I know you need these 2 books at least, but beyond that, it's a good question. So this whole season pass thing, it's got its ups, its downs, depending on who you are, what kind of game you play. But it's not the only way that Games Workshop is looking at the kind of to take stuff from the video game industry as far as a business model is concerned. There's also DLC to some degree. Now, DLC in video games stands for downloadable content, meaning like, hey, you play this game where you ride a horse a lot, but we made horse armor that's separate. You got to buy that so you can have cool horse armor on your horse, that kind of thing. We could have put it in the game because we made it, when we made the game, but we didn't. So now and they're doing that with Kill Team, frankly. The way that Kill Team works, the new version, is that, you buy the book with the rules, and then you had to buy the compendium with the army lists for all the armies out there, and frankly, it wasn't great. I've talked about that, made a video about it if you're so interested. Pachow. And now what they're doing is they've released the box sets that now have new rules for, initially it was for new armies that weren't in the compendium, I get that, but now they're adding in some new Sister stuff, and they're adding in some new Tau stuff in the Chalnath box. You already could play Sisters and Tau, but now these are better lists, kind of, the ability to build more interesting lists. And now they're also starting to slide that stuff into White Dwarf as well. So if you want to play a better list of Adeptus Mechanicus, well, just buy this episode or issue or whatever of White Dwarf, and then you get it. And in my mind, that's a DLC move. And again, I understand they're a business. I get why Games Workshop looks at the video game industry, the entire tabletop gaming market. And I'm talking not just tabletop wargaming. I'm talking throw in Magic the Gathering, throw in Dungeons and Dragons, throw in everything, board games, the whole shebang. That entire market grosses about 1% to 2% of the video games industry's gross each year. We are tiny in comparison to the video game people. So I can understand why Games Workshop's going to look at those big video game people and go, well, they're doing it that way. Maybe we want to start taking some of those things into our particular business model. But here's the thing. They're not apples to apples. You know what I mean? Like, Sure, the video game industry makes a humongous amount of money, but on the other hand, I can buy a game which is going to cost about the same as a box of intercessors, and that's the entire game. And maybe I'm going to do a season pass, 10, 15, 20 bucks. Maybe I'm going to do some horse armor DLC, whatever the deal is, throw in a little bit of extra. Oh, I want a fancy hat. Okay, that's $2. Whatever the deal is. But when you compare how much it costs to get into Warhammer 40,000 in comparison to how much it costs to get into a video game, I don't know if necessarily Games Workshop should be taking a look at the video game industry and trying to pull some of that idea of that economic scale into their particular business model. And here comes the opinion. I said this was an opinion piece, but I've said for years that Games Workshop is the biggest draw into tabletop wargaming. They're the biggest dog in the yard, so it totally makes sense. New players who are all of a sudden become aware of tabletop gaming, painting little dudes and pushing them around the table and all that stuff, generally learned about it from learning about Games Workshop. That all being said, I would love for Games Workshop to be truthful and publish a guide for new players. And by publish, I mean put it on the web. It's not a book we have to buy. Publish a guide, some sort of chart even, aimed towards what's actually needed for each type of player. Like if you're just an open, you just want to play open, you probably need the core rule book, which you can actually technically download the core rules, and you need a codex. That's literally about as much as you need. If you want to do more narrative and crusade and stuff, well, you're going to need this and this and this. And then if you want to go, and then if you want to play, because like sometimes you want to play, let's say Space Wolves. You can't just buy the Space Wolves codex because it's a supplemental codex, and you also need the Space Wolves codex. And so knowing all that from the get as a new player would be actually much better for the industry, because honestly, with Ninth and where things are going, I'm starting to wonder if, as a new user, staring down the barrel of a confusing mess of dozens of books is pushing potential players away from the hobby. You know what I mean? Like, you have no idea as a newbie what it is that you need. And I think that it's up to Games Workshop to teach people that, at least if they want to actually capture these folks into the hobby. Because if they're not, those people are just deciding this is too much for me. Hopefully they're checking out other games here in tabletop wargaming that may be, a lower buy-in, easier, that kind of stuff. But maybe this whole thing of Games Workshop looking for cues from the video gaming industry is actually just driving potential new players and hobbyists back to video games.